I woke up one morning to the kind of silence that tells you something is very wrong. My front door didn't creak the way it usually did when I twisted the knob. In fact, the knob wouldn't even turn. For one wild second I thought I'd somehow forgotten my own lock combination, but then reality set in. My lock had been changed. Overnight. While I was asleep inside. The thought was enough to send a chill down my spine, but the anger came right after. Who had the audacity to change a person's lock without permission? It didn't take long for the obvious answer to land in my lap like a brick. The HOA. And more specifically, Karen. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood's homeowners association, had been circling me for months like a hawk who couldn't find fresh prey. She hated my non-compliant shutters, my unapproved mailbox, even the color of my grass. Apparently it was too green. She once accused me of overwatering in a drought, despite us not being in a drought. But this was a new level of insanity. She had effectively locked me out of my own home while I was still in it. A hostage situation created by a pad of brass and a woman drunk on power. I sat down on the stairs with my coffee, staring at the useless knob, and couldn't help laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd that laughter was my only defense. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't going to call the cops in a frenzy or beg the HOA for mercy. No, this was Karen's opening move, and I was already planning my checkmate. She wanted control? I was going to show her what control really looked like. I called a locksmith. Not to change the lock back, but to give me something Karen couldn't touch. When the guy showed up and I explained the situation, he whistled low and shook his head. "That's illegal as hell," he said. I nodded, calm as ever. "Which is why I want you to install something stronger." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" That's when I said the words that made his eyes widen in amusement. "A steel security door. Industrial grade." He laughed, thinking I was joking. But when he saw I wasn't, he shrugged. "Well, if you want Fort Knox, you'll get Fort Knox." And that's exactly what I got. A steel-reinforced door, triple bolts, a deadlock system that made my house look like it belonged in a high-security facility. The kind of door you don't so much knock on as question your life choices before approaching. Watching it being installed was therapeutic. Every drill of the screwdriver, every heavy clank of metal, was like hammering a nail in Karen's coffin of control. By the afternoon, I had my new door, and Karen had no clue yet. I could already imagine her face when she tried to stroll up with her master key and discovered her empire had crumbled. The image alone kept me smiling as I brewed a second pot of coffee. My house wasn't just secure, it was untouchable. Karen thought she'd locked me out of my own life, but in reality, she'd just handed me the excuse to fortify it beyond her reach. The real test came quicker than I expected. At around 6 p.m., there was a sharp, angry rattle at my front door. The knob twisted once, twice, 3 times, followed by a loud metallic clunk. Then came the voice I knew too well, shrill and shaking with rage. "What is this?" Karen screeched from the porch. "Why doesn't my key work?" I leaned against the inside wall, sipping coffee, and let the scene play out. She hammered on the door like a banshee, yelling accusations about community standards and property rights. I stayed silent, savoring every second of her tantrum. She had assumed she could lock me out at will, but now she was the one locked out of the power she thought she held. My door had become the perfect metaphor, impenetrable, unyielding, and completely indifferent to her demands. She finally shouted, "You can't just change the locks. That's an HOA violation." The irony was so rich I almost choked on my coffee. After a few more minutes of impotent rattling, she stormed off, promising to bring this up at the next meeting. I waved at the security camera I'd installed above the porch, knowing her meltdown was being recorded in glorious HD. That night, I sat in my living room with the steel door gleaming behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Karen had tried to escalate the war, but I had turned her move into her own defeat. Still, I knew Karen well enough to understand this wasn't the end. It was only the opening round of something bigger, something more ridiculous, and the thought of that didn't scare me, it thrilled me. Because I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building my fortress, brick by brick, lock by lock, and Karen had no idea how far I was willing to go. I took one last sip of coffee and set my mug down with a smirk. Let her bring her HOA rules, her petty threats, her endless complaints. I had a steel door now, and behind that door stood someone she couldn't control, manipulate, or intimidate. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt like I wasn't just surviving Karen, I was outsmarting her. And the game had only just begun. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. I had circled the date on my calendar the moment Karen screamed her promise through my steel door, because I knew she would not let her defeat sit quietly. Karen doesn't stew, she boils. And when she boils, she needs an audience. The HOA meeting would be her stage, her courtroom, and her personal therapy session rolled into one. When I walked in, the air was already heavy with Karen's perfume and presence. She was seated at the front of the long folding table like a monarch on a plastic throne, papers stacked in front of her in meticulous piles. The other board members flanked her on either side, wearing the exhausted expressions of people who had long since stopped believing they had any say in the matter. The second she spotted me, her lips curled into that triumphant smirk, the kind of look a cat gives when it thinks it has cornered a mouse. I gave her a small nod, calm, casual, sipping from my travel mug of coffee like this was just another Thursday evening. In reality, I had come prepared. The meeting started with the usual boring agenda. Landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, some complaint about teenagers leaving bikes by the park bench. But Karen wasn't here for budgets or bike. She was practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for her moment to pounce. It came when the chair asked if anyone had new business to raise. Karen's hand shot into the air like a rocket. "Yes," she announced, voice sharp enough to cut through drywall. "We have a serious violation by one of our homeowners. A violation of access, security, and community trust. This individual," she jabbed her finger directly at me, "has installed an unauthorized steel door, effectively blocking HOA emergency access to the property. This is a blatant disregard for our bylaws." The room stirred. A few heads turned toward me, curious, some annoyed, but none surprised. Everyone knew Karen lived for these public spectacles. I didn't react right away. I let the silence hang, let Karen bask in her own drama. She mistook my calm for intimidation. "I have here," she continued, lifting a sheet of paper dramatically, "the HOA rule that states all exterior modifications must be pre-approved by the board. This individual," again the finger, now trembling with rage, "chose to install what can only be described as a bunker door without seeking approval. Not only is this unsightly, but it represents a safety hazard. In the event of an emergency, HOA officials must have access to all homes. His door prevents that access." She slammed the paper down as if she had delivered the final blow. The audience murmured, waiting for my reaction. I set my mug down on the chair arm, leaned forward slightly, and finally spoke. "Karen," I said evenly, "are you admitting, on record, that you and the HOA believe you're entitled to access my home at will?" Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Of course we need access in emergencies," she snapped. "Interesting," I said, voice calm, almost bored. "Because last week, while I was inside my home, someone changed my lock without permission, which effectively trapped me inside. I'm sure you'll agree that was a massive safety hazard. Shall we discuss who authorized that little stunt?" The room went silent. You could almost hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. Karen's face flushed crimson, her composure cracking. "That is irrelevant," she spat. "The issue here is your door." "The issue," I countered, "is that the HOA is not above state law. What happened to my lock is a crime. What I installed is a security measure to prevent further crimes. Would you like me to call the police right now so we can all clear this up? I pulled out my phone and held it up casually. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's smirk vanished, replaced by a twisted mask of panic. She waved her hands frantically. No, there's no need for police. But the damage was done. Board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a man named Frank who usually stayed quiet, cleared his throat. Karen, if his lock was changed without permission, that's pretty serious. Maybe we shouldn't. Karen cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. This is about community harmony, she shrieked. We can't have one person barricading themselves behind fortress doors while everyone else follows the rules. It sets a terrible precedent. I leaned back, let her rant, then delivered my finishing move. Actually, I have precedent on my side. From my bag, I pulled a folder and slid it onto the table. Inside were printed copies of state statutes regarding property rights and home security. I'd done my homework. According to state law, a homeowner has the absolute right to install security measures on their property, provided they do not endanger others. My door doesn't endanger anyone, it only prevents unauthorized entry. You might want to reread your bylaws before you start waving them around. The effect was immediate. Karen's face went white, then blotchy red, like a malfunctioning traffic light. She sputtered, searching for words, but the board members were already flipping through the copies, nodding slowly. One even muttered, "Well, that seems clear enough." Karen tried to recover. "He's twisting the law. He's trying to undermine the HOA." I stood, gathering my things, and gave the room a small smile. "I'm not undermining anything. I'm simply protecting my home. If you'd like to find me, go ahead. I'll see you in court with these statutes in hand. And I'll also bring the recording of Karen admitting that the HOA believes it has unrestricted access to private homes. Should be an interesting case." Gasps again. Karen lunged forward, slamming her hand on the table. "This meeting isn't over," she yelled, but her voice cracked halfway through. I calmly picked up my mug, tipped it in a mock toast to her, and walked out without another word. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Karen had tried to humiliate me, to make me bend to her authority, and instead she'd been the one exposed. I didn't need to win the room with yelling or theatrics. I'd done it with calm facts, the one thing Karen couldn't spin. Of course, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to retreat gracefully. No, this public embarrassment would only fuel her. She'd double down, find another way to claw back her power. I could already picture her pacing her kitchen, glass of boxed wine in hand, plotting her next move. And I welcomed it. Because each time she came at me, she revealed more of her desperation. Each time, she made herself look smaller, weaker, more absurd. My job was simple. Stay calm, stay clever, and let her destroy herself. As I walked back to my house, the gleam of the steel door greeted me like an old friend. It stood there solid and unyielding, proof that I couldn't be pushed around. Karen thought she was building a case against me, but in reality, she was building a monument to her own pettiness. I sipped the last of my coffee and smirked. The game was escalating, and I was enjoying every move. The week after the HOA meeting was almost too quiet. Karen had gone radio silent, which in our neighborhood was more suspicious than her usual shrieking. Normally, she'd be stuffing my mailbox with courtesy notices about imaginary violations, or standing in my driveway with a clipboard pretending to take compliance notes. But now, nothing. No letters, no glares from across the street, not even her usual dramatic sighing when she walked past my house. That silence wasn't peace, it was plotting. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she was cooking up. On Tuesday morning, I pulled out of my driveway to head to work and found a group of strangers loitering near my front yard. Clipboards in hand, cameras dangling from their necks, and that nosy, self-important aura that screamed official inspection. At the center of them, of course, was Karen, arms folded and chin high like she was leading a military raid. "Good morning," she said, voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "This is an authorized HOA inspection. You are required to allow us entry to the property." I parked the car halfway down the driveway, stepped out slowly, and just looked at her. She had assembled 3 board members and 2 volunteers, her makeshift posse. Their expressions ranged from uncomfortable to eager, depending on how deep they were in Karen's orbit. "Entry to the property?" I repeated calmly. "You mean my private home?" "Yes," Karen snapped, clearly annoyed that I wasn't bowing to her authority. "We have reason to believe your so-called security door violates fire code, not to mention aesthetic. We need to take interior photos to verify compliance." I stared at her for a long moment, then actually laughed. "So let me get this straight. You, an HOA president with no legal training, want to march into my home, take photos, and call it an inspection? Do you hear yourself?" Karen's face flushed, but she kept her composure, addressing the others as if I weren't even there. "You see? Non-compliant, evasive, aggressive. This is exactly the kind of behavior that undermines community trust. We must document everything." She stepped toward the door, motioning for her entourage to follow. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit the button on my new security app. The steel door's automated lock clicked loudly, echoing like a gunshot in the morning air. "Step 1 foot on my porch," I said evenly, "and I'll call the police for trespassing." There was a tense pause. The board members glanced at each other, uncertain. Karen's jaw worked furiously, like she was chewing on her own fury. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Try me," I replied, holding the phone up like a weapon. "And by the way, this entire interaction is being recorded. Say hello to the camera." I pointed to the discreet black dome above the porch. The little red light blinked cheerfully back at us. Karen actually tried to wave it off. "Oh, please, you can't use those recordings in court." "Actually, I cut in, I can. Especially when it's evidence of attempted trespassing and harassment. Would you like me to send this footage to the county sheriff's office? I'm sure they'd be fascinated by the HOA's authorized inspections." The volunteers shuffled uncomfortably, clearly realizing they had been dragged into something shady. One of them, a woman named Janet, muttered, "Maybe we should go." Karen whirled on her. "Don't you dare back out now. This is about the integrity of our neighborhood." But her army was crumbling. 2 of the board members backed away, mumbling excuses about needing to get to work. Within 30 seconds, Karen was left with only one reluctant hanger-on, who looked like he regretted ever picking up a clipboard. I folded my arms, watching the scene unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone who knew they'd already won. "Karen," I said finally, "you don't seem to understand. You don't own this property. The HOA doesn't own this property. I do. That steel door isn't just a door, it's a line you can't cross. Every time you try, you make my case stronger." Her face was a mask of rage, lips pressed so tightly together they practically disappeared. She hissed, "This isn't over." "I hope not," I said cheerfully. "Because the more you push, the more ridiculous you look. And frankly, you're doing me a favor. I don't even have to lift a finger, you're building my legal case for me." Karen stormed off, dragging her lone follower with her, and I watched them retreat down the street like a defeated parade. I knew this wouldn't stop her. It would only make her more desperate. Sure enough, that night, I found a bright orange notice taped to my door. In bold capital letters, it declared that I owed a fine of $1,500 for unauthorized modifications and noncompliance with HOA directives. At the bottom, in Karen's unmistakable scrawl, was a note: "Pay within 10 days or further action will be taken." I poured myself a coffee, peeled the notice off, and tucked it neatly into my growing folder of evidence. Every petty fine, every notice, every outrageous demand, brick by brick, I was building my wall. Not a physical one, but a legal fortress. Karen thought she was tightening the noose, but really, she was just handing me more rope to hang her case. The next morning, I sent an email to the entire board. Polite, professional, and dripping with calm sarcasm. I acknowledged the fine, reminded them that changing my lock had been a crime, and attached links to the relevant state statute. Then I CC'd the county code enforcement office and a local attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Within 2 hours, I received 3 replies from board members, none from Karen. The replies were apologetic, nervous, and clearly desperate to distance themselves from her. One even wrote, "We did not authorize any lock changes. Please understand that was not a board decision." Translation: Karen had acted alone and now they were scrambling. Karen, of course, did not respond. But her silence was louder than words. She was boxed in, and she knew it. That didn't mean she'd stop. No, Karen was the type who, when cornered, lashed out even harder. And I was ready for it. I had cameras, I had documents, and most importantly, I had patience. Karen thought this was a sprint, a quick show of power to scare me into compliance. But I was in it for the marathon. I could outlast her. I could outthink her. And every move she made would only dig her hole deeper. That night, as I locked my steel door and settled into bed, I actually found myself smiling. Karen had escalated from locks to inspections to fines in less than 2 weeks. Where could she possibly go next? I had no idea, but I knew it would be desperate, dramatic, and wildly entertaining. And whatever it was, I'd be ready. If there's one thing I've learned about Karen, it's that embarrassment doesn't make her retreat, it makes her dangerous. The HOA meeting hadn't shut her down. My refusal to allow her fake inspection hadn't either. The fine was a laughable move, one I immediately forwarded to my attorney. But then Karen escalated to something new, something I hadn't expected. She brought in outsiders. It started on a Saturday morning. I was in the backyard, sipping coffee and trimming the hedge, when I heard the rumble of a vehicle pulling up in front of my house. Not Karen's SUV this time, but a white van with County Fire Safety Inspection Unit stamped on the side. 2 men in uniform stepped out, hard hats tucked under their arms, and walked toward my front door. Karen was right behind them, practically bouncing with glee. "This is it!" she shouted to no one in particular, like she was announcing a parade. "The county is here to inspect that illegal bunker door." I calmly set down my clippers, brushed off my hands, and walked around to meet them. The fire inspectors looked professional, clipboard in hand, clearly used to more serious calls than whatever circus Karen had dragged them into. "Morning," one said. "We received a complaint about a potential fire code violation involving your front door?" I gave a slow nod, as though this was exactly the comedy I had been expecting. "Ah yes. Let me guess. The complaint came from this woman." I tilted my head toward Karen, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. Both inspectors glanced at each other, then back at me. "We can't disclose complainants, sir," one said carefully, though the smirk tugging at his lips gave him away. Karen jumped in anyway. "Yes, it was me. I reported this hazard. That door is a death trap. What if firefighters need to get in during an emergency? What if a child is trapped inside? He's endangering the whole community." Her voice echoed off the houses, neighbors peeking through curtains to watch the spectacle. I folded my arms, waited for her to run out of steam, and then gestured politely to the inspectors. "Would you like to take a look?" Inside, I showed them the steel-reinforced door, explaining the triple bolt system, the emergency override from the inside, and the fact that it opened outward for quick exit. I even had the manufacturer's compliance documents ready, printed and highlighted. "This door," I said, "is fire code certified, rated for commercial use, and safer than the cheap wooden doors most homes here have. It's designed to withstand both forced entry and fire." The inspectors examined, checked off boxes on their forms, and one even whistled low. "Honestly," he said, "this is one of the most secure and compliant installations we've seen. Whoever reported this probably doesn't understand what they're looking at." Karen's face froze, the color draining as though someone had unplugged her battery. What? No. You don't understand. He installed it to keep us out. He's hiding something in there. The inspectors exchanged another look, then gave me an apologetic smile. Sir, you're fine. No violations here. In fact, you're probably safer than half the homes in this neighborhood. I followed them back outside, Karen trailing like a shadow that had lost its light. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk now, whispering, watching. Karen tried one last desperate appeal. You have to do something. He's making a fortress. This isn't normal. One inspector shrugged. Ma'am, normal isn't against the law. This house is safer than yours. If anything, you should be taking notes. And with that, they climbed into their van and drove off, leaving Karen standing alone in the street, fists clenched, lips trembling with impotent rage. The neighbors chuckled, shook their heads, and drifted away. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast to her. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just fighting me, she was losing her grip on the whole neighborhood. Her constant crusades had always been tolerated, even humored, but now she was embarrassing herself publicly. Each failed stunt chipped away at the illusion of authority she'd built. But Karen wasn't finished. The next escalation came in the form of law enforcement. 2 days later, a patrol car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. Karen was waiting outside my house again, practically dragging the officer up my driveway. This is the homeowner I told you about, she shrieked. He's violating HOA regulations, refusing inspections, endangering the community. The officer held up a hand, visibly irritated already. He turned to me. Sir, we got a call about some sort of dispute between you and the HOA? I handed him the folder I'd been building for weeks. Every notice, every fine, every statute. Officer, I'm glad you're here. Because this woman has been harassing me non-stop. She changed my lock without permission, attempted to trespass, and now she's filing false complaints. Everything is documented, including video. The officer flipped through the papers, eyebrows rising. Karen's smug smile began to wither. That's not true, she stammered. He's twisting everything. He's dangerous. He has a steel door like a criminal. The officer closed the folder, gave me back the papers, and turned to her. Ma'am, nothing in here suggests he's breaking the law. If anything, it looks like you're the one overstepping. Changing someone's locks? That's tampering with private property. I suggest you tread carefully. Karen gasped, clutching her pearls like she'd been physically struck. Are you taking his side? I'm taking the side of the law, the officer said flatly. Then, to me, if this continues, sir, don't hesitate to file a harassment report. As he walked back to his car, Karen let out a strangled cry. This isn't fair. He's ruining our community. I smiled pleasantly. Karen, you're doing a fine job of that all by yourself. The patrol car drove off, and Karen stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I stood there a moment, watching, then walked back inside and shut my steel door with a satisfying click. That night, as I sipped coffee and reviewed the day's events, I realized Karen's playbook was emptying fast. She'd tried the HOA. She'd tried fake inspections. She'd tried county authorities and the police. Each one had backfired, making her look more desperate. But desperate people don't stop, they double down. And as much as I relished every defeat she suffered, I knew she wasn't finished yet. She'd try something bigger, riskier, maybe even reckless, and I was ready. Because the truth was, Karen wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting the reality that her power was crumbling. The HOA was cracking, the neighbors were laughing, and every stunt she pulled only made me stronger. The steel door wasn't just keeping her out of my house, it was shutting her out of the throne room she'd built for herself. And I knew, deep down, she would rather burn down the castle than accept she wasn't queen anymore. So I waited, patient, calm, smiling, because whatever she threw next, I'd be ready to turn it back on her one last time. I didn't have to wait long for Karen's final act. came on a Thursday evening, the kind of night when the air hangs heavy and you can feel trouble stirring before it even arrives. I was in my living room, reading, the steel door bolted behind me, when I heard it, an angry pounding on metal, louder than anything she had tried before. It wasn't the sharp, panicked knocks of someone in distress. It was the frantic hammering of someone who had completely lost control. I set my book down, walked to the door, and checked the camera feed on my phone. What I saw almost made me laugh out loud. Karen was on my porch with a crowbar. A crowbar. She was jamming it against the edges of the steel door, grunting with effort, muttering to herself between every shove. The image was both ridiculous and horrifying. A middle-aged woman in yoga pants trying to break into a neighbor's house like a cartoon burglar. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood two of her most loyal HOA followers, though from the looks on their faces, they were regretting every second of it. They shifted nervously, casting glances at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the fact that they were now accomplices in an attempted break-in. Karen barked orders at them between crowbar swings, demanding they help leverage the hinges and hold steady. For a moment, I just stood there in the dark hallway, letting the absurdity sink in. Then I did what I always did, I stayed calm. I pressed record on my phone to save the camera feed and quietly dialed the non-emergency police line. My voice was smooth, almost casual, as I explained. Yes, this is / my name. I live at / address. 3 individuals are currently attempting to break into my home with a crowbar. Yes, I have live video footage. Yes, I'd like an officer dispatched immediately. The dispatcher assured me units were en route. I poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. Outside, Karen grew more frantic. She was sweating now, hair sticking to her face, yelling at the steel door like it was a personal enemy. You can't keep me out. This is my neighborhood. You don't belong here. Her crowbar screeched against the reinforced frame, leaving nothing but scratches on the paint. The neighbors began to gather. First one, then another, then half a dozen, drawn by the noise and chaos. They whispered, filmed with their phones, shook their heads. Some shouted at her to stop, but Karen was too far gone. She was staging her meltdown in front of an audience, and she didn't even realize it. Then the sirens came. 2 patrol cars screeched into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing red and blue across the manicured lawns. Officers jumped out, commanding voices cutting through the night. Step away from the door. Drop the crowbar. Hands where we can see them. Karen froze, eyes wide, crowbar still clutched in her hands. For one insane moment, I thought she might actually swing it at the officers, but instead she dropped it with a metallic clang and threw her hands in the air. This isn't what it looks like, she cried. I'm the HOA president. I have authority. The officers weren't impressed. They separated the 3 of them, questioning each in turn. I finally opened my steel door, stepping calmly onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, as if I were just a curious spectator. Evening, officers, I said smoothly. I think you'll find my security cameras have everything you need. I showed them the live feed on my phone. Karen prying, grunting, screaming, ordering her cronies to help. It was undeniable. The officers' expressions hardened. One of them turned to Karen. Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted burglary, destruction of property, and trespassing. Karen gasped, staggering back like she'd been shot. Burglary? No, you don't understand. He's the criminal. He's ruining our community. I was enforcing the rules. The officer snapped handcuffs onto her wrists. Ma'am, HOA rules don't override state law. You can't break into someone's home. You're coming with us. Her followers, pale and shaking, tried to plead ignorance. We didn't touch anything. She said it was an inspection. The officers took their statements, clearly unimpressed, and warned them they could face charges if the homeowner decided to press. Karen, meanwhile, was shrieking as they led her to the squad car. You're all blind. He's the problem. He locked me out of my own neighborhood. I'll sue. I'll have your badges. This isn't over. Her voice cracked into sobs as the door slammed behind her, muffling the sound. The neighbors, gathered in a wide semicircle, were filming the entire spectacle. Some were laughing openly now. Others shook their heads in disbelief. I raised my mug to them in a mock toast. "Well," I said calmly, "I guess that steel door really paid for itself." The laughter rippled through the crowd. The officers took my statement, accepted a copy of the footage for evidence, and assured me the charges would stick. "Honestly, sir," one said, "we don't usually see HOA disputes end with crowbars. This is a first." When they finally drove away with Karen in the back seat, the neighborhood exhaled as one. People lingered, chatting in hushed tones, replaying the madness on their phones. By the next morning, the videos were already circulating through group texts, social media, and the neighborhood's private Facebook page. Karen had always seen herself as the queen of the HOA. But now, she was the viral star of her own downfall. The woman who had tried to control everyone with fines and notices was now immortalized online as the unhinged HOA president arrested for trying to crowbar into her neighbor's house. Within a week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, this time without Karen. Word spread quickly that she had been removed as president, pending the outcome of her charges. Some said she might face jail time. Others said she'd be fined heavily and banned from serving on any HOA board again. Me? I just kept drinking my coffee, watching it all unfold with the same calm detachment I'd carried since the first lock was changed. My steel door remained untouched, a monument to patience and planning. Neighbors who once avoided me now stopped to chat, congratulating me on standing my ground. "You handled that better than anyone else would have," one said. "I would have lost my mind weeks ago." I smiled, shrugged. The trick is not to fight her chaos with more chaos. You just stay calm, build your wall, and let her collapse under the weight of her own nonsense. And collapse she did. Karen's empire was gone, her power shattered, her reputation in ashes. The steel door she hated so much had become the symbol of her undoing. She had thrown everything at it. Fines, inspections, county officials, even a crowbar, and it had never budged. Neither had I. That's the thing about people like Karen. They think control is power. But real power is patience. Real power is knowing when to let someone dig their own grave, one petty, entitled move at a time. As I sat on my porch one evening, coffee in hand, watching the sunset glint off my indestructible door, I couldn't help but smile. The game was over, and I had won, not by shouting, not by stooping to her level, but by staying steady, calm, and unshakable. Karen had lost access to everything, my home, the HOA, the respect of the neighborhood. All because she tried to take what was never hers. And all because I had installed a steel door.